Akadosh Bokero Bekiim Bahalacha for day 25. Siman 25, so it's 25, 25, page 65. Okay? Here you have it, David, if you want to give them up. Right there. Okay? Okay. Lecha Techila. Right? אסור להפסיק בין הנחת תפילין של יד של תפילין שלוש, אף שמפסיק במעשה. If you want to give it to them also. Yeah? So he says like this. So basically, one more time. Lecha Techila, a person has to put tefillin shel yad and tefillin shalosh in a single act, right? Havaya achat. What does it mean havaya achat? Without any type of an interruption whatsoever. And therefore, you're not allowed to even hint, right? You're not allowed to do anything, whether it's going to be any type of an action, even without speaking. So you can't signal with the eyes, the hands, nothing. The same halacha would apply that it's forbidden to give charity to a beggar between putting on tefillin shel yad and tefillin shalosh. This is because one must concentrate on one's thoughts on putting on the tefillin, and any of these actions, they detract from one's concentration. So it's asur. Okay? What about pulling down the sleeve? Even an act connected to the mitzvah tefillin is forbidden at this time. Therefore, don't pull down the sleeve to cover the arm on the tefillin shel yad until after you put on the shorosh. You understand? That means first finish with the rosh. After you finish with the rosh, now you continue with everything else. Okay? 65. Look on the bottom. Is an act considered an interruption? Okay, the bottom of page 66. The Rosh Yeshiva Purat Yosef of Ezra Atiyah asked Maran in Shul Tzion whether an action is considered an interruption and whether it's forbidden, right, wherever interrupting with speech is not permitted. His response is this question is published in Yebia Omer. He began with a proof from Rashi's comment to Ruvin, demonstrating that an action is considered an interruption, no less than speaking. So an action is like a hefsek. It's also like speaking. So he then cited a response of Sedei Aretz, dealing with someone who recited the blessing for, let's say, Chanukah lights, and then he did the shamash first. So the question is it considered a hefsek? So the author's discussion is whether the lighting of the shamash can be considered part of the mitzvah. If the action is part of the mitzvah, so if it's going to be okay. And he spent more than 1 second performing it, it would definitely be considered an interruption. The Rishon LeZion suggested a third proof from the comment of Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Magen Abraham's ruling that if someone's arm is bandaged and he must put on his tefillin shel yad over the bandage, he should not say the bracha of laniach tefillin before putting on the tefillin shel yad. Instead, he should recite both the blessings of laniach on the tefillin before putting it on the tefillin shel rosh, as if he was not putting on tefillin shel yad at all. Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, since he's going to recite both the blessings anyway, why not say the laniach, right? And that's it. So he answered by saying that since his arm is bandaged, he does not perform any mitzvah by putting on the tefillin shel yad over the bandage. Therefore, since he's supposed to say the bracha laniach on the mitzvah tefillin shel rosh, and therefore it's going to be a hefsek. So he says this is not a valid proof that Rishon LeZion concluded. It could be that if it is forbidden to interrupt by performing an unrelated action, but that does not mean that if someone performed the action, he would need to make a bracha again. Because sometimes sometimes it could be a hefsek, but you just don't need to make a bracha. But it doesn't prove that it's be'emet a hefsek or not. So based on this, the Rishon LeZion turned to the ruling, the response to Kol Eliyahu. He says a common practice in Sukkot where a person gives the Arba Minim to someone on condition, right, to give it back. So he says the way the most people do it is the owner holds the lulav while the other person says a bracha and then he hands it over to him. The recipient takes the lulav, acquiring it, and then does a mitzvah. He says, is that good or not? Because he's making a hefsek. So the Rishon LeZion suggested that according to the Kol Eliyahu, apparently in certain, right, he says in other actions it does constitute, right, an interruption, and therefore invalidates the bracha. In this case, he was uncertain because maybe you could be lenient, right? So Rav Shmuel Garmizan, he comes and he says also the 2 barrels of wine. One definitely is tevel, and one is trumot u'masot separated, right? That means one is untithed that you didn't take off trumot u'masot, and one you did. So he says, but you don't know which one is which. So he says after saying the bracha for the mitzvah, you want to take off the truma. But how do you do it? Which one do you do first? Because if you took off on the wrong one, maybe you made sound like you made a hefsek. So Shmuel ruled that this was the incorrect procedure, since the second barrel might not have to be separating at all. So if so, the act of separating from the barrel constitutes an interruption. So the Shalom Sion conclusion, he says, is that the poskim are basically uncertain whether this action is considered an interruption or not, and therefore one must make sure not to interrupt. Why? Because maybe be'emet, it's a problem. Okay? Even if you want to perform another mitzvah, for example, giving charity or whatever it is, don't do such a thing. What about if a sefer falls on the floor? Imagine you put on tefillin shel yad, a sefer falls on the floor. Can you pick it up? But you're making hefsek. Or you have to put on tefillin shel rosh and then pick up the sefer. So he says here, the response to Kinyan Torah ruled that if someone was putting on tefillin and noticed that a sefer has fallen on the floor, right before he put on the tefillin shel rosh, he must not pick it up until after the tefillin shel rosh. He says if he did interrupt, he will not say nu beracha, right? As we just explained. Chaim Kanievsky, however, ruled that if someone became agitated at the thought of ignoring the sefer, he may interrupt to pick it up. Meaning, depends on your. If you feel that you're chayav to pick it up, just pick it up and that's it. Because you're going to feel that you're not going to be able to concentrate on anything that's going on. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, same thing. Okay, next part. Ubdiavad, imasai is a maase. One of them is ubdiavad, somebody did do a maase. For example, he was minamiz. He hinted with his fingers or with his eyes. Whether it's tzorech tzorech mitzvah, you don't have to make another bracha. Why? You didn't make hefsek b'dibur. That means even though lechat techila, we just said don't make any type of hefsek, right, as an action. But b'diavad, as long as you didn't speak, you don't have to make a new bracha. It could be it was a hefsek, but no beracha. Why? Look in 66, right? That Rishon LeZion conclude that though it is forbidden to interrupt, but he says, but you don't have to make another beracha. What about pulling down one sleeve? You remember that's what he said at the beginning. So he says here that Rishon LeZion added, following the rules, that it is apparent that one should not pull down the sleeve of the tefillin shel yad before putting on the tefillin shalosh. If someone would do that, so then again he's making a hefsek. This is a ruling also of Rav Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Tilmim, in contrast over orach. So he says, he explained that although it is proper to pull one sleeve down, right? He says, but you do it later on, or you do it with a talit, but not later on. You do it. Okay. The Nitivot HaChaim took issue with this ruling. He said pulling down one sleeve is for the mitzvah itself, because it says Vayaleot al yadecha, it should be a sign for you and not for other people. So for the tefillin shel yad, amul yo b'shvilcha, lo b'shvil acherim, for you, not for other people. So therefore, that's why you cover it. You cover the tefillin shel yad. Tefillin shel yad is covered. The tefillin shel rosh is revealed. You understand? So he says, therefore, one should have the tefillin shel yad covered while wearing it. So since it's important to have so they pull down the sleeve. It's not considered an interruption. This could be compared to mixing water into the cup of wine while doing Birkat Hamazon. Although you're not allowed to do any act during Birkat Hamazon, if you need it for Birkat Hamazon in itself, so it's mutar. So the same thing here. Yalkut Yosef, he countered this ruling and he said that this halakha does not demand the tefillin shel yad to be covered from the use of others. It's a stringency of the Arizal HaKadosh. Therefore, pulling down one sleeve is unnecessary. He says, "Zelo chova, let's say you left the tefillin shel yad like this without any covering. You're not used to the chova? For sure you are. It's a chumrah of the Arizal HaKadosh. כן, לא, אבל הרבה אנשים גם כן מורידים את הבית. Even if you take off the bite. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be... Yeah, but he says there's no problem. Right? But the Yavad, there's no problem. So right, not but Yavad. I mean, this is a chumrah of the Arizal HaKadosh. You don't have to do it. So he says, so it's incorrect. And therefore, the Alachabra also concurred with this argument. The Nitivot HaChaim defended, right, his ruling, permitting one to pull down one sleeve. Nevertheless, the Rishon LeZion ruled stringently in this matter when pulling down the sleeve is not really real necessity. And in any case, right, it should be done only after the tefillin shel rosh. This needs some explanation. Yakut Yosef ruled that it's permissible to signal to a beggar to wait until after putting on the tefillin shel rosh. So now 1 second. So basically the question is, why would it be permitted to do like this, right, to a person that needs, to a beggar? Why is it permitted to do like this? Yeah, but here also you're doing a mitzvah. You're putting down the tefillin, you're putting down the thing. Huh? So he says this act is unrelated. So he says apparently the Rishon LeZion saw these things from a different perspective. First of all, signaling to a beggar is not really an action, although it should be avoided unless necessary for a mitzvah. Furthermore, it's permissible to signal him only if he would leave otherwise. So when someone fails to pull down his sleeve until afterwards, nothing is lost. He could pull it down a minute later. Nothing happened. He's saying the beggar might leave. So signal, so he should stay. He says it's tefillin shel yad, the sleeve. Wait 1 minute. What's the big deal? It's going to be 1 minute before, 1 minute later. Salam nishos. Well, what's going to be the difference? Fine. ובמקום צורך קצת, כגון ללמוז, לעני שימתין לו עד שיניח תפילין שלוש וחלקה ייתן לו צדקה, מותר להפסיק ברמז. You're allowed to do רמז, right, between the תפילין שלי ותפילין שלוש, and even לכתחילה, וכל זה דווקא כשאי אפשר בעניין אחר. That's only if it's impossible in any other way or form. 67 on the bottom, he just says over there, that Rishon LeZion cited the respondent l'chok tanot, if someone communicates to someone else before putting on the tefillin shel tefillin shel rosh by signaling with his eyes or his hands, it's a interruption. The Kavarim Falache also cited this ruling, but he commented that this is true only if the person communicated by signal for the sake of mundane purpose. The Rishon LeZion said, but if it's for a mitzvah, there shouldn't be a problem. Meoreh also added, right? He brings this down and he says no one agrees with this ruling since that such an interruption makes another beracha. You don't need another beracha. Okay, the Rishon LeZion comment we cannot bring any proof from the rules of Hilchot Kriyat Shema because Kriyat Shema you're not allowed to do nothing, not even for a Kaddish. You're like it's a certain place you're not even allowed to have Kaddish Kedusha even. So when putting on tefillin, however, you could answer to Kaddish Kedusha. You're not allowed to answer to Kaddish Kedusha. Basically saying like this: you're in the middle of Kriyat Shema. You're allowed to answer Kaddish. You're allowed to answer Kedusha. In the middle of tefillin, you're not allowed to. So there's a big difference, right? So he says, furthermore, if someone made a mistake and interrupted in Shema, and he speaks to someone for any reason, he doesn't have to repeat the Kriyat Shema again. But he says, but the bracha of the tefillin, he does. So because of that, obviously the Rishon LeZion is saying that obviously it's not the same halacha. Although the Kavakim did not say clearly whether it's permissible or not to signal for the sake of mitzvah while putting on the tefillin, he says the Rishon LeZion comes and he says that it's permissible to signal to a beggar to wait. Right? There's no problem. Okay, it is difficult to understand why the Rishon LeZion chose to rule leniently and ignore the halachot tanot. He basically just wants to say, okay, he does bring down that the Yabia Omen, it says only if he's going to lose the opportunity of the mitzvah. And the Lichot Olam, he didn't bring this down, but he did bring it down in the Yabia Omen. So therefore, he's basically just saying, if the guy's going to leave, then you could hint him. But if the guy's not going to leave, so therefore it's better not to do anything whatsoever.